Hey everyone, and welcome back to Fine Print. This is episode 4 of the AP World History Exam Review, where today we're going to be covering Unit 6, Consequences of Industrialization. When talking about the consequences of industrialization, it is very important to discuss the rationales for imperialism used by Europeans. Firstly, social Darwinism stated that racism, eugenics, and imperialism were all justified by the belief that certain races were naturally dominant to others, such as the Europeans, and it was their job to dominate these third world countries. Next, the civilizing mission was when the European and American imperialists justified colonization as helping spread Christianity. The French called it mission civil satras. They believed that it was their duty to help the primitive and uncivilized peoples, and here they're talking about the third world civilizations. They also believed that conquering inferior territory would increase their own national pride. When it comes to the expansion of imperialism, state expansion was key. The definition of colonialism is as follows: the displacement of indigenous populations, impositions of European political systems, and the extraction and exploitation of resources. Imperialism was European domination and control of other countries, and led to the subjugation of local and native populations. Industrialization was the growth of new capitalist economies, and led to the expansion of trade and commerce. Nationalism was the emergence of a new nation-state and the decline of empires that led to swelling national pride. And lastly, wars were a cause of the shifting of state power throughout the conquest and annexation of territory. When it comes to African imperialism, Britain firstly invaded Egypt and connected the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, as they wanted to secure control of the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal was built by the French and Egyptians and allowed ships to travel from Europe to Asia, which had great strategic importance and led to many countries fighting for it. Britain established control over territories in West Africa and exploited many resources, mainly gold and oil. In the late 19th century, France began establishing colonies in Africa, leading to disputes between Britain and France. The scramble for Africa was when, at the Berlin Conference, European countries established the rules for the partition of Africa amongst themselves, and not a single African representative was present. It led to the official European control in most coastal African countries. When it comes to imperialism in East Asia, it starts off with British imperialism. The British established control over the Indian subcontinent, known as British India. They used East Asia to establish trade, commerce, and as a source for raw materials and a market for manufactured goods. They also imposed new political and economic systems, suppressed local cultures, and exploited resources and labor. When it comes to French imperialism, they established colonies in present-day Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, which were known collectively as French Indochina. American imperialism came far later, when they annexed the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico and established control over Hawaii. Lastly, Japanese imperialism expanded their influence in East Asia, parts of China, Korea, Taiwan, and nearby islands. It was characterized by military conquest, suppression of local cultures, and the exploitation of resources. Now, with all this imperialism, there ought to be some indigenous responses to this. Firstly, there were many native complaints against imperialism. Many indigenous people were displaced from their traditional lands as imperial powers claimed them for their own use. Imperial powers often exploited the natural resources on indigenous lands without regard for the welfare of native peoples. Imperial powers often sought to assimilate indigenous people into their own religion or cultures, and in Europe's case, it was Christianity. Indigenous peoples were often forced to work on European-owned plantations, mines, and other industrial projects. Imperial powers denied indigenous people the right to self-rule, imposed their own systems of government, and committed large-scale physical violence and genocide against these native populations. Many anti-imperial movements followed as a result of these complaints. Firstly, political nationalism focused on achieving self-government and independence for a particular nation or group of people. Cultural nationalism focused on preserving cultural heritage. Economic nationalism focused on achieving economic self-sufficiency and independence from the mother country. Social nationalism focused on achieving social equality for a particular nation or group, and sought to address poverty, discrimination, and inequality. Nonviolent nationalism focused on achieving independence through diplomacy, education, and propaganda. And lastly, armed nationalism focused on achieving independence through armed resistance. Some examples of these anti-imperial movements are as follows. First was the Indian Rebellion, also known as the Sepoy Mutiny. It was a rebellion by sepoys, or Indian soldiers in the British East India Company, due to their guns being lathered with pig and cow fat. The Indian loss in this battle led to the official establishment of the British Crown in India. The Cherokee Nation was a sovereign nation of the Cherokee people in the US who were forced to move to Indian territory after the Indian Removal Act of 1830. The Cherokees soon re-established their nation and became federally recognized. Moving on, many global economic developments followed during this time period. First was the export economy. Many export economies experienced growth through imperialism, mainly the United Kingdom. During the Industrial Revolution, textile, steels, and steam industries grew vastly. The United States and Japan experienced massive growth in their export economies as well. Some technological developments of this time period are as follows. Firstly, railroads greatly improved transportation, facilitated the movement of goods and people, and transcontinental railroads in the US and Canada opened new markets for trade and investment. The telegraph facilitated communication and trade, and allowed instant communication across long distances, and also improved the flow of information. Cecil Rhodes was a businessman who played a major role in the growth of export economies through the re-establishment of the British South Africa Company, and also expanded trade and investments. The steamship also increased speed and efficiency of international trade. Some raw exports were as follows. Cotton led to the mechanization of cotton production through the power loom and the spinning jenny, and led to a rapid increase in cotton textile production, primarily exported from the US and India. Rubber, as the demand increased with the invention of the pneumatic tire, was produced in South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. Palm oil was used for soaps, candles, and lubricants, and was mainly produced in West Africa and Southeast Asia. Copper and tin were operated in many countries for use in manufacturing industries, and were an import and export mainly available in Malaya, Bolivia, and Indonesia, and led to the environmental degradation. Ivory, minerals, and diamonds were obtained from Africa and Asia, and were used in many forms of jewelry. However, they led to the loss of sovereignty and cultural heritage for many colonized people. Some global consequences of industrialization are as follows. The overexploitation of natural resources led to deforestation, soil erosion, and the displacement of communities and labor exploitation. It also led to the colonization of many regions around the world that led to mass atrocities in places like America, Africa, and Asia. When it comes to economic imperialism, many European countries were far ahead. Some goals of economic imperialism were as follows. Many countries wanted to control resources like oil, minerals, and land to grow their own economies. Markets for goods and services allowed countries to increase their exports, for example, India. Investments wanted to invest in other countries to gain access to new materials, markets, and labor, for example, Africa and the slave trade. Many countries wanted to also gain strategic advances, such as military and naval bases or access to key waterways. European countries also wanted to spread their own culture and religion to other countries, believing that their way of life was superior to others. Some causes of economic imperialism are as follows. The pursuit of resources, markets, and profits by European and American powers. The growing demand for raw materials and markets for the Industrial Revolution. The desire to establish colonies and trading posts in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. The need to control strategically important locations. The desire to exploit the resources and the labor of colonized peoples and countries. And lastly, competition among European powers for global dominance. There were two types of economic imperialism followed in this time period. Firstly, formal economic imperialism was when the country had a direct control of a colony by a foreign power through the establishment of a formal political and economic system, and imposed tariffs and trade regulations, for example, British India and British trading posts in China. Informal economic imperialism was when a country had indirect control of a country's economy through trade agreements and investments, rather than through formal political control, and led to the exertion of economic influence without the need for formal colonization. For example, the United States in Latin America. The Opium Wars were a perfect example of economic imperialism, more specifically, the informal version. British merchants had been exporting opium to China, where it was in high demand because of its addictive nature. Opium harmed the health of Chinese citizens, so the Chinese government destroyed a large quantity of opium held by British merchants and led to the First Opium War. Britain won due to their superior naval and land-based techniques and forced China to sign the Treaty of Nanking. The Treaty of Nanking was a treaty that forced China to open several ports to British trade, pay indemnity to Britain, and cede Hong Kong. The Second Opium War soon followed. As opium trade continued, China tried to stop it and led them to another war with Britain, who had French support, and won and forced China to sign the Treaty of Tientsin. The Treaty of Tientsin forced China to open more ports to foreign trade, legalize the opium trade, and pay indemnity to Britain and now France. This whole situation weakened the Chinese economy due to the exploitation of ports and worsened the lives of Chinese citizens who had become addicted to opium in the process. Lastly, when it comes to the port of Argentina and foreign investment debt traps, Argentina heavily relied on foreign direct investment for infrastructure projects and business investment, and Britain was the largest investor. Argentina wanted to build a port in Buenos Aires, where there were two competing proposals for where and how to build it. The British proposal won more support and made their imports and exports cheaper and more efficient. Later, Argentina experienced a currency crisis and sent a government delegation to London to renegotiate the terms of Argentina's loans. Argentina had to agree to not borrow money from the British, prevent local and municipal governments from taking more debt, raise gold reserves, withdraw paper money, and send London a percentage of their custom revenues and buy back the Buenos Aires water supply from Barings Bank in London. This satisfied the Argentinian government's short-term needs. However, looking at it long-term, it resulted in a further crisis for civilians, as many banks went bankrupt. That was all for Unit 6 of AP World History. If you're liking the series so far, be sure to keep following Fine Print, since tomorrow we're going to be talking about Unit 7, Global Conflict. Until then, keep following Fine Print for more episodes, and stay tuned for Unit 7.